we were told that Durban Conference of Parties is going to be one of the most difficult, equally difficult as the one in Kyoto and Bali, because the key expected outcomes were all political and issues of economic or sustainable development. So therefore, they are political, so therefore it's going to be very, very difficult. There was absolutely nothing necessarily technical. We had the mammoth task of saving the Kyoto Protocol through the second commitment period so that we avoid the gap between now and 1st January 2013. We managed to do that. We had to get commitments and agreement on the long-term cooperation agreement, which was political and came out with a 200-page agreement, and that's what we got. We also had a challenge and a key objective of making sure that the Green Climate Fund is launched in Durban. We got that. We also knew that countries, those who are who are signatories or ratified the first Kyoto Protocol, were saying, and those who did not, were saying that just the extension of the second commitment period of Kyoto was not enough. That in Durban, leaders need to look at the future, how we save this future of climate change regime by initiating the discussions on how countries developing and developed start or finding mechanisms to start working together in the future beyond 2020. We managed to do that. We managed to get that agreement. These were the main four key issues of sustainable development or climate change issues that hinge on sustainable development, on the economics of countries, but primarily very, very political.
Sure. Minister, you've obviously got the second commitment of Kyoto, as you say, the new pact, Green Climate Fund, and so on. But a short while ago, I was talking to Kumi Naidoo of Greenpeace, and he says to me, those were baby steps. If you look into the detail then, we still have a problem. We have a problem because timelines and targets will, if we stick to these timelines and targets, will fry, so to speak, because the degrees will rise by something, he says, 4 degrees, and that's bad for the climate.
Pumi and I know that for us, these steps that he's referring to are the steps where governments, the 192 governments and the other 2 observer parties, had to first get these very giant steps where governments agree on these key political issues for us to be able to start working together to look at timelines as we move forward and targets. Pumi and I and everybody knows that the ratification of the convention itself took a bit of time because you have to have all parties, in fact all governments, reaching a consensus that these are the steps that we'll take in a conference. Targets also are the steps that get taken informed by the outcome of political agreements that we had to take. That's why these agreements were very, very critical, and that's why other governments before us focused on technical outcomes because that was easier to do. The last time we tried to focus on the difficult political issues was in Copenhagen, and the conference almost collapsed to its knees.
Sure.
And that's why Cancun avoided going back there to deal with the political issues. So that's why all these key political outcomes had to landed up for us in Durban.
In order for us to understand the implications of what happened in Durban, some people are talking numbers now. There's an article in the Financial Times today. It talks about it says either way, countries signing up to the extension are only likely to account for about 15% of global emissions. Now, 15% is absolutely nothing because us in developing world, us in Africa, are going to be exposed if only 15% of these emissions are going to be dealt with.
Kolani, it's important, it's true that we share information with our people.
Yeah.
The second commitment period saved Kyoto and us also by saying that in the Annex 1 parties where your Americas and others will be sitting, through the LCA, there is a process of MRV where there's a matter of how they should be doing their commitments through comparability. So if we did not sign on second commitment road, those of us who belong to Kyoto, it means that they will have no efforts to undertake themselves. They sit in this meeting because we will find a way through the Annex 1 mechanisms for them to also undertake their responsibilities. So it's 11 plus and that's why when we signed on the future framework, it's the first time and historic after Kyoto that we have an agreement that has everyone else in, from America to Vanuatu.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the Green Climate Fund. Then, of course, it was operationalized as per an instruction from Cancun. But the reality is that funding formulas have not been discussed. At least we don't know about where the money is going to come from other than the donations that were made by Germany and Denmark.
Well, the Green Climate Fund, there were temptations from many countries who wanted to start making pledges, almost beginning to cherry pick that we will fund adaptation mechanisms through agriculture in Africa and so on. And we declined them that opportunity because we did not want them to start fragmenting the unity of developing countries. What was important was that to remove the uncertainty and the fragmented approach on how issues climate change funding were dealt with in the past, we needed to focus on the launch of the Green Climate Fund itself, but also make sure that accessibility to the funds and funding in the future in the manner how this was going to be adopted do not close out either governments or recognized civil society organizations to access this fund. By the time we left Durban, almost $100 million were pledged in establishing the secretariat for the actual GCF itself. Now, Durban's mandate, which was very critical, was to make sure that we focus on the launch and put the mechanisms on the ground on how this GCF was going to work and how it was going to be governed. And therefore, on long-term financing, there was a committee that looked specifically on the funding sources. And from today, moving forward towards Qatar, by March, the first meeting of the board will take place where all these mechanisms will be put in place. So there are timelines throughout the year as what is going to be happening now that we have established the fund.
There's also another issue that's coming up here because people are saying, for instance, that the legal nature of the deal that was signed, I'm talking here about the new pact, is open to different interpretations and that perhaps it may very well be a battleground going forward.
Tolani, if you look at the UNFCCC processes, you have to find or get the deal and make sure that all countries sign on it. The next is how do you make sure that it's fully implemented? Through the UN systems, it's never too easy, but the first step is to make sure that there is an agreement so that if you were to defend, you know exactly what you are defending. If you have to insist on the implementation, you know what you're talking about.
We're still talking to COP17 President Maite Nkoana-Mashabane. Minister, thanks again for your time here with me. The maneuvers in relation to the Green Climate Fund and, of course, refusal to accept those donations. I just want to know from you in terms of the timelines, when are African countries going to start benefit from this fund? I'm talking about the countries that, of course, are desperate for mitigation and adaptation purposes.
The African countries and all other developing countries will start benefiting immediately. As I said earlier on, by March, the first board meeting will take place in Switzerland. So that should, remember that there were still some outstanding resources through the fast start financing that came with the TC, the Transitional Committee. This Transitional Committee and funding thereof had to continue until end of 2012. But therefore, those funds will then have to be collapsed into the Green Climate Fund. Yes.
I think it would be quite important as well just to get more details, if we may, on this new pact. What will happen from now until 2015 and then from 2015 until 2020?
What would happen is that because we have managed to extend or to commit to the second commitment of the Kyoto Protocol, leaders have agreed to work on the extension of Kyoto until 2015, and that there will be a review between 2013 and 2015, informed by science, but also by the Intergovernmental Committee, the IPCC, that presents a report on how we are doing in our mitigation efforts. So that will then, after the review, we will take decisions as how should we further quicken our steps. In the same vein, through this agreement of the future of the Framework Convention, the work would start immediately, and by 2020, we should then start implementing.